So, hi everyone, and it's great to have you all here. I think people are just going to kind of gradually trickle in, but we'll get going just so we can stay on time. So to introduce myself, my name is Susanna Lloyd and I am Head of Programmes at Doctors in Distress. So welcome firstly to the start of our Reflective Spaces programme, which we are running alongside the College of Paramedics. And it's really great to have you here today. And I hope that this session will give you more of an idea about what to expect from our following 9 weeks of support. And just to say, our chat box is open. So if you have any questions, please do pop a question in there and I'll endeavour to get through all of them as we go. So you can see we've got a lot of people on our screen today. We've got Steve, Mary, Barbara and Catherine who are going to be facilitating our programmes. We have Joe and hopefully Liz very soon from the College of Paramedics, and our wonderful speakers, Craig, Advanced Practitioner and Suicide Prevention and Self-Harm Lead from the North West Ambulance Service, and David Snowders, Wellbeing Support Counsellor from the Ambulance Service Charity. So thank you all of you for being here, and we really look forward to hearing from you later. So I just wanted to take a few minutes as we started just to tell you a little bit about what we do, some of the practicalities of the programmes we're running for paramedics before handing over to Joe to tell us a little bit more about the college. So Doctors in Distress runs confidential virtual support groups for all healthcare professionals, not just doctors, as our name may suggest, across the UK. So with our Reflective Spaces programme, we wanted to provide spaces where people who've been working in extremely high stress environments can come and share with each other, share their concerns, and just have a space to talk and support each other in an informal space. We know that this last 18 months has been extremely difficult for all of you in many different ways, and not just because of the pandemic. Normal life carries on as well with all its problems. But whether you are on this call because you have been shielding, you have long COVID, or you've been on the front line, you are very welcome, and we are here to support you over the following 9 support sessions. And so, as I mentioned before, today is a chance to be introduced to the facilitators and hear more about the groups. So just a few practicalities as well before we start. Thank you to everyone who's filled out our registration forms, and I know you've given us suggested times for the groups. We've had to go with the majority, but I hope the majority of you will be able to come. So our long COVID and shielding groups are going to run from the 21st of September every Tuesday from 11 to 12:15, and they will be run by Steve and Barbara, who you can see on your screen. The frontline groups will run from the 23rd of September on a Thursday every week from 5 till 6:15 p.m. and will be facilitated by Mary and Catherine, who you also will see. So there are going to be 9 sessions in total. We have 8 weekly support groups and a final all-together webinar to finish the programme where you can provide feedback and share together. A few days before the programmes will start, you'll receive a Zoom link for the programme. And in terms of what to expect on the first one, you'll log on, you'll be allocated into a breakout room with a facilitator, and this will be your person for the remainder of the sessions. And each week you will have 75 minutes to talk as a group. We don't have set topics for discussion, but you are free to bring whatever you would like to talk about, and there is space for everyone to share if they would like to, and we'll hear a little bit more about this with the facilitators later on in the session. It won't be like today where you can't see each other. You will be able to see each other, just as a warning, but that's what to expect from the groups. So that is enough from me. And as I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat box. I'll put my email in there as well if you'd like to share more privately. But over to Joe to talk about the college.
Hello there, thank you very much, Susanna. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Susanna has said, really. But firstly, I just want to thank the COVID Healthcare Support Appeal, who's actually provided us with the grant money to be able to set this up for you guys. So I was really very thankful to them. And then also to Doctors in Distress for sort of doing the groundwork and putting this all together for us. So I think it's important to say really that at the College of Paramedics, we really recognise how hard you're all working at the moment, and it's, you know, COVID has been a really difficult time, as Susanna said, in many ways. It's touched our lives in different ways, professionally and personally. And it's about recognising the impact that that's had, but also we well recognise that demand is continuing to be significant upon everyone. So it's about giving you the time and the space just to offload and to say what you need to say and to share within a group of like-minded people who may have been through similar situations. So that's really the thinking behind why we've set this up. Yeah, and I think that's about all I need to say, really. I'm just so glad that we've been able to do this, and I really hope that it's a really positive thing for you.
Great, thank you, Jo. And now, Craig, over to you. Craig, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are and your work? And I think Jo will ask you a few questions as we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as Susanna alluded to earlier, I'm Craig Hayden. I'm one of the advanced practitioners, suicide prevention lead for the North West Ambulance Service. As Jo knows, I also volunteer as a police officer in my spare time as well. So I work in our emergency control room. So we provide secondary telephone triage to patients who may not necessarily require an emergency ambulance, and can signpost them to more appropriate care services, but also provide senior clinical support and advice to our clinicians operationally on the ground. As part of my role as well in the Masters that I'm studying, I also do some frontline shifts on rapid response cars and ambulances, and I lead on the suicide prevention and self-harm work stream. And I just want to say thanks really to Jo for asking me to come along today and having a chat with yourselves.
Thanks very much for being here, Craig. I really appreciate it, and obviously you've got the frontline experience that's really going to resonate with people who've joined us today. So I wonder if you could share a little bit about your experience during COVID and the support that you received.
Yeah, so as Jo knows, I kind of come from it from two perspectives really. So I come from it from a professional perspective, working for the ambulance service, but I sadly lost my own mum to COVID-19 during the pandemic last November. And I remember when we first went into kind of the COVID started coming about nationally, and it was, are we going to go into lockdown? Aren't we going to go into lockdown? And I remember kind of having those difficult conversations that I'm sure most of us as healthcare professionals have had with our loved ones around, do we stay at home? Do we carry on visiting potentially family members until we were told that we weren't allowed to visit other households? Or do we stay away from family and friends due to our role? I suppose the difficulty that I faced was that I live in a city away from the rest of my family and friends. So all my friends and family generally live in Liverpool. I live in Manchester. So all my mates up here in Manchester are also my work colleagues. And it was kind of that we knew what our demand was going to be facing. We knew what was coming towards us, but I don't think we understood how bad it was going to get. And I remember having the conversation with my family saying, you know, we don't know what this COVID-19 is, what the risks are to us or yourselves, you know, some of us are going to get sick. And I vividly, you know, remember it over national TV when Boris Johnson stated people will die before the time. And I always remember thinking, is that going to be me? Is it going to be one of my colleagues? Is it going to be one of my loved ones or my friends? But I made a decision to stay in Manchester away from family for their safety. I struggled massively. So I was kind of used to being, you know, that frontline copper, going about dealing with some challenging situations, being that clinician who, you know, as a manager and leader, staff were used to coming to me for that support, and I was used to giving them that welfare support. And I felt massively isolated. I felt isolated being in a bedroom, you know, a one-bedroom apartment with no balcony, no garden, thinking, what do I do when we go into lockdown? And then, you know, a few months into the pandemic, you know, we looked at what are we going to do to support our colleagues. So within our department, we set up a welfare box because we knew that there were staff members similar to myself who were living at home. Some of them may have struggled to get out into the community between shift patterns to get, you know, food, stock up in the cupboards and fridges. So we all made it as a collective decision as a team to go out and start buying food. And we used to bring those items in to work. And it was literally, if you had the money, you know, you could more than you're welcome pop stuff into the box yourself. If you didn't, don't worry about it, but still take something home yourself. And we set up I set up a walking group with one of my colleagues called what we did brand as Walkie Talkies. And that was a walking group for emergency service personnel, so the fire, the ambulance, the police. No sooner did we set that walking group up, we went on to national lockdown and we weren't allowed to meet. So we had to start thinking, well, what are we going to do? Now, I was very, very fortunate. My mates and my colleagues, they knew I lived alone. So we used to do regular check-ins. We used to do quiz nights over Zoom, just a bit of a rant over the telephone. But my direction changed massively when Mum got sick, unfortunately. And I remember thinking, what do I do? Do I go home and be with my mum and my family and run the risk of getting infected myself and then not being able to go to hospital? Or do I stay at home in Manchester? And that was probably the hardest decision I ever made, because for myself, being in a one-bedroom apartment, knowing about all my family back home in Liverpool within a COVID household, my mum had been transferred to an intensive care unit. If I'd gone home to the household that was COVID infected, I wasn't going to be allowed that opportunity to go into hospital if they allowed me to. So I had to make a very conscious decision to start home in Manchester, knowing that my mum was on a ventilator, and not being able to see my family. Now, that was tough because my family come to me expecting me to have all the answers as the clinician in the family. I'm the only healthcare professional, and sometimes I just wanted to vent, sometimes I just wanted to cry. And I've got to honestly say that my colleagues were the best. I probably had more support from my colleagues, my team, the people that I would normally support with welfare issues. They were the ones looking after my welfare. And I probably had more support from them than what I did with my own management team. There were a couple of managers who were great with me, but there was some managers that I expected to have checked in and done welfare checks with me who didn't. And I sometimes wonder, did they know what to say? Did they know what to do? We were all facing a really unprecedented situation, but I struggled with that thinking. As a manager, I judge people on my own standards. So I was thinking, well, if I would judge, look after my team, why is my manager's not looking after me and I'm in their team? But my colleagues were the best. I honestly don't think they got through the COVID-19 pandemic without the support of my colleagues. And I think sometimes, even as managers, so, there's leaders and managers on this webinar who are sitting there thinking, who do I go to support? Sometimes that support may well be the team that you normally support, because that's what I found in this situation. It wasn't the people above me that I would expect to look up to. It was my team around me that I would be used to dealing with on a day-to-day basis. You were saying, Scouts, can I just bounce this decision off you? Scouts, I'm not sure what to do here. They were the people reaching out to me. They were ringing me. They were checking in. And when we were allowed to go for walks, they'd come and meet me. We'd go for a breakfast together. And they've just been amazing. And since that, I've kind of sat there and wondered, what do we do now to support those people that supported me? Because we've all had our own little wobbles, and I think it's okay to say, have a wobble. I've had numerous wobbles throughout the pandemic, still do occasionally. And we've since set up now a walking group specifically for our organisation, where staff are able to get out, and it's supposed to be a safe space for staff. So if they just want to improve their physical exercise, their psychological well-being, a safe space for if there's something going on at work, that they can just chat about it. And we've recently met up with some staff members who I've never met within our organisation, but we've met for the first time on a walk, and it's been so refreshing to just be able to, go for a walk with a complete stranger and talk and not be judged without thinking, is this going to go back to the organisation?
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that, Craig. You said it with complete genuineness, and it was really powerful what you were saying. But I really took from it how important it was to share and just to chat to people, and how it really helps to have that support around you, which is kind of very similar to this support group that we're having and we're starting now. It's a place to chat and to share things, like I said earlier. So you found that really helpful.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, Joe, I think, as healthcare professionals, frontline emergency responders, I think sometimes we probably put too much of an expectation on ourselves. So I think sometimes we think we've been to a really traumatic instance and we've been to another traumatic instance, and it's kind of like, put your big trousers on, we've done this before, we'll do it again. And actually, that just starts to take effect over time. And I think that during the COVID-19 pandemic particularly, I noticed how that was starting to take an effect on me. Stuff that I felt I was able to deal with quite comfortably, I started to struggle to deal with. Stuff that probably I would never have shared previously with colleagues, I started being more open. and sharing with them. But for me, the biggest reality was, you know, sometimes it is okay, isn't it, just to have a bit of a chat with your colleague and say, I'm struggling here, I need to vent, I need to talk. Because actually, you know, that problem shared is a problem halved. I always say, you know, and it's a true saying, it's a massive weight lifted off your shoulders. But I think as frontline clinicians, we just think that there's an expectation that we just have to get on with it, and you can't speak out about how you feel. And I think that's what we need to change. And I think we're getting better at it. I think groups like this are helping us get better at it. But I think we need to do more, and we need to put some individual ownership upon ourselves to do that as well.
Yeah, just give ourselves permission to talk, and it's cliche saying of it's okay to talk. It's true. And when you spoke to your colleagues and your friends, what was their reaction like? It sounds like it was really positive and they were really supportive.
Yeah, they were, and to be fair, they probably made me look a bit deeper at myself, really, because I kind of expected that, you know, as the clinician within the family, I had to take responsibility for the situation that I was facing. It was my responsibility to kind of say to the family, this is what's happening, everything's going to be okay. And actually, I remember a colleague saying to me, Craig, you're a son. You're not a healthcare professional now, you're your mum's son. And we kind of all knew that we were grieving before mum's death had actually taken place. And I remember my colleague saying to me, you know, you're grieving, you're allowed to grieve. This is your mum, this is not your patient. She's a mum, you're not a clinician now, you need to take a step back. And I remember my colleague saying that, and I don't think I would have ever recognised that. I'd have probably just kept on taking, I need to ring the hospital, I need to update the family. And it took from a colleague who's a bit external to the situation to say, stop, let's take a step back, let's have a rethink how we're going to progress this moving forwards. But it was nice that that colleague was someone that was in my team who would probably sometimes come to me for the answers, and I would be used to giving them the answers. They were giving me the answers, so it was a bit of a role reversal. But that role reversal works sometimes, and there's no shame in that. There's no shame in as a leader saying, I need support from a team around me.
And it gives them an opportunity to help and support you.
Yeah, and I remember coming back to work. When I come back to work, I got allocated a duty of candour case. So it's an instant where you have to speak to a bereaved relative about where potentially things may have gone wrong and lessons that need to be learned as a result of that. And it was very, very quickly after me returning back to work. And I kind of just gone, okay, I'll get on with it. It's part of my job. And I remember one of my colleagues saying, no, you're still grieving. You may be back at work, but you're still grieving. You can't be dealing with someone else's grief when you're still dealing with your own grief. And I was kind of like, you're right. You can still come back to work and be grieving, but you've got your colleagues around you to help get you through that process. And when you're doing something like duty of candour, it's so personable that you'd be doing it on your own with no colleagues around you. You can go to a job, can't you, with your colleague, and your colleague can say, is this too much for you? Do you need time out? Are you sure you're okay going into this situation? But there's certain circumstances involved where you're on your own. And I remember that colleague saying to me, you're not doing this, you need to go and speak to a manager. And I did, and the manager said, you know what, I didn't even think of it. I didn't even think that you'd still be going through that grief process yourself. So it's good to listen to your mates and your colleagues around you sometimes.
They can give you advice, and they can see things from a different perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you ever so much for that, Craig. It was really, really helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. That's been really good. And I have a question for you, but I don't know if anyone else on the screen or in the chat box wants to pop in a question. I'll ask mine, and then anyone else can hop in. But I know you mentioned as well, Greg, that you were talking about, you went on walks with friends and you spoke to friends and colleagues, and they gave you that support. You were saying that you kind of noticed in yourself that things maybe weren't quite right. What was it that made you realise that? Because I think sometimes it's very hard in ourselves to notice that. So were there any kind of signals for you that things weren't maybe going quite so well and you needed to speak to your colleagues?
Yeah, so my sleep was awful, absolutely horrendous. So I'd always suffered with my sleep, but my sleep definitely got worse. I kind of felt like I was starting to ruminate more on issues that probably I didn't need to ruminate on. I probably drank more than what I would normally drink, to be fair. So I've always been a bit of a party animal, but I probably drank more than what I would normally drink. And kind of, I remember like my friends say, I'd say, oh, do you want to just go out for a drink? And they'd be like, no, not tonight. And I'd be like, oh, I fancy just going out. And I kind of think for me, it was kind of what I needed at that time to get through my grief. It got me through it, but it doesn't get everyone through it. And I think you've got to be able to recognise it. And I had really good friends around me who were able to recognise that, to say, you don't normally drink this much, but what's going on? I remember just wanting to stay in bed all the time. Really getting out of bed and wanting to shower and wanting to eat was a real battle for me, a massive struggle. And I would eat rubbish. I'd just not long got into cooking really healthy foods, and I lost all interest in it. And then just kind of wanting to shy away from people. It was an effort just to reply back to a text message. So my mates sometimes wouldn't ring me, they'd just text me to say how's things. And it was an absolute effort just to be able to reply back to them on a text message. And for me, I'm quite an outgoing, sociable person. I'll always put myself out there to support others and make an effort to do that. And it's kind of like I just kind of become a bit of a recluse, and my friends picked up on that as well. That I wasn't that person who would be ringing, texting, wasn't on social media as much.
Yeah, so it's really your friends and your colleagues that helped you, and by talking about it in your own time, that's what really helped you.
Yeah, and interestingly,
not come out the other side, but
yeah, interestingly, people who I felt were just colleagues, and I don't say that in a disrespectful way, but people who I thought were just colleagues have now become friends as a result. And I don't think just because of my own bereavement with mum, but I think that what we've gone through during the pandemic, I think, we all knew that there was risk when we signed up to the job that we did, but I don't think anyone would be able to say that we thought we'd be dealing with a global pandemic as part of our careers. And I think, it does bring you a lot closer together as people.
Yeah, and I think you're in such a unique position in the world that you're in to have that close network, and it's amazing that you used it in such a positive way, and it could be of such a support to you. And I'm sure your colleagues feel supported by you as well. It's not just one way. Liz, you've got your hand up. I don't know if you've got a question.
Hi, yes. Hello, Liz Harris, Head of Professional Standards at the College of Paramedics. Craig, nice to see you, mate.
Hi, Liz.
I was just reflecting on a couple of things about the blue light and the learning lessons from other emergency services, and thinking about what helped you. What are the little things that helped you get through that? Because obviously in some respects you've got a quite unique perspective. You've got the other profession perspective that you have as well, haven't you? So we're just thinking about it from that point of view. And the national work that we've been doing together, did that help at all, focusing on that? So yeah,
it did. So I think there's a few things really. I was kind of one of these practice what you preach. So we've been doing a lot of the national work, as you rightly say, Liz. And for me, I'm all about, we have to support and promote, people to feel open and talk about how they're feeling. And if I'm practicing, if I'm out there preaching, saying, as clinicians, don't be afraid of speaking up about how you're feeling. It's okay to say that you're struggling with your mental health or you're having a bad time. If I can't do that, but I'm preaching to other clinicians to do that, I'd be a hypocrite. So I think for me, I had to start speaking. And again, I remember a colleague saying to me, Craig, you're being a bit of a hypocrite. Look at the work that you're doing nationally and locally within the organisation. I was kind of like, oh yeah, a bit of a wake-up call. Two, that blue light work that you kind of related to, Liz. So being a copper and working in the ambulance service, it's very much about, I kind of refer to it as a bit of a brotherhood as such. So, the girls and the lads on the team, you have to have each other's backs when you go into situations that you don't know what you're about to face. Some of those situations are quite dangerous, quite risky, and you've got to know that the person you're working alongside is there behind you. So we've always had quite a close-knit relationship as colleagues. So I think that definitely helped, having the lads and the girls from both the ambulance and the cops kind of checking in on me and making sure that I was okay. I think, interestingly, I'd seen up and down the country reports of colleagues losing their lives to it. And I was kind of like, I'm a bit luckier. Yeah, I've lost my mum very sadly, but I'm still here. And that probably sounds a bit selfish, but actually for me, it was kind of like, there's always a worst case scenario that someone else is going through a worse situation than what you're going through. And then I did have some periods of CBT as well. And the CBT definitely helped. I didn't continue with it because I felt at that time I wanted to go through a normal grief process, and I didn't want the CBT to kind of overshadow my normal grieving process. So I did have some CBT sessions initially, and they definitely helped. They definitely helped stop the ruminating. and that kind of, I think Mary commented before in the chat around what helped you become also that recluse. The CBT definitely helped with that. Really did. I remember when Mum died, I've never been someone who's really suffered with panic attacks. I've always been a bit anxious every now and again. But I remember, you know, just walking down the street, I can only describe it as like a tsunami of emotions that would just hit you. You'd feel that your day was absolutely fine. You were getting on with your day-to-day life. And then all of a sudden it would just hit you in the face, and it was this, I can't breathe, have I got COVID? And I knew I hadn't had COVID because I was testing myself for COVID as part of my job. But because of what I'd experienced with Mum, I started to have those feelings and thoughts that potentially I've got it, and actually it was anxiety. So going through that CBT really helped, just give me a bit more structure to my day, and actually saying, you know, just getting in the shower, having a shower and cooking yourself, you know, your breakfast or your lunch is a start to your day. You don't have to get out there and start doing walks. You don't have to go and see people. You don't have to reply to everyone's texts or calls, but just getting up out of beds, you know, trying to get to bed at a reasonable time was enough to kind of start giving me a bit more of a routine.
Thank you, Craig. And I think on behalf of everyone, you've been so honest, and I think everyone will be able to resonate with what you say. Like, you've been through a very unique set of circumstances, but I am sure that everyone on this call will be able to relate in part to what you've said. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nicola has actually said, you're a great example of how a team can support you. And she says, unfortunately, I experienced the same, losing my mother, being part-time and on my own with my 2 children. There wasn't anyone around to recognise, and she didn't have support from her management. And she goes on to say, I think it's important to recognise that some people may not have friends due to various circumstances. And the ambulance service charity, David, supported me with counselling, which I'm grateful for, but still feel being part-time leaders lack the understanding of how hard this can be.
Absolutely. I'm sorry to hear about your loss.
Yeah, Nicola, I'm sorry that you
and as Joe knows and Liz knows, I'm very passionate around, you know, the well-being of staff members. Even as a nurse, I often bang the drum at our meetings and say, you know, it's not all about us paramedics, it's about nurses as well. It's about all blue light staff, and you know, I'm very passionate about that. I'm doing a charity event next month. It should have been today, but it was postponed due to some work commitments. And one of the charities that I'm fundraising for is Task, because they just do an absolutely amazing work for our ambulance staff out there.
Yeah, and Nicola, and to everyone as well, like, we as a charity really want to, as Craig says, bang the drum for mental health support amongst management, and to really support across all sectors and encourage people to talk. It's hard, it's unusual, it's not necessarily seen as a common thing to do, but I think we've seen with Craig's story how much it can help. And if we can encourage management and everyone to start talking. Yeah.
Sorry, Susanna, I think it's really
Craig.
pertinent to say this. I'll get off my soapbox soon. But as Liz will openly say, and Joe, there's lots of work going on there, you know, with ACE, with PhD, with the College of Paramedics, around how we support our staff and promoting that culture around it's okay to actually raise issues around maybe poor mental health if you're struggling in work. One of the pieces of work we're doing is trying to get our regulatory bodies on board, from a HCP perspective and also the NMC perspective, to say that actually disclosing that you're suffering with poor mental health or struggling with your mental health isn't to say that you're a bad clinician. And it's not, you know, you shouldn't be going down the fitness to practice route if there's no concerns around your ability to practice as a healthcare professional. And I'm glad that the NMC have signed up to that. And I know that the HCPC are also keen. So from a national perspective, we're there in the background banging the drum to say, you know, to our regulatory bodies, you need to support these clinicians with actually speaking out about how they're feeling without fear that you're going to go through a fitness to practice process.
Brilliant, thank you, Craig. Sorry, Jo. Carry on.
Sorry, I was just going to add in, there is so much going on behind the scenes. We're working really hard to try and improve things for people's mental health and well-being.
Brilliant, thank you, and thank you everyone. So we're now going to speak with David. David is Wellbeing Support Counsellor at the Ambulance Service Charity, who have come up many times for the brilliant work they're doing already. So David, firstly, who are you? I've done a little introduction, but maybe a kind of broad introduction about yourself, and what is your role at the Ambulance Service Charity?
Certainly, thanks very much, Susanna. Firstly, Craig, thank you very much for that, because that is what we need more people to do, is to open up more. And a lot of the calls that we have coming through to Task are people very worried that their ambulance service will find out they've been to us, and they don't. But it's that point about speaking up. So thank you for that. Yeah, so about myself, well, I've been in counselling, or doing counselling now for about 20 years. I came into counselling because I went through work-related stress. Craig, I was with the police for a while as well. I was with the British Transport Police, saw a couple of suicides on the track, and decided that I needed counselling. Went to the GP, who gave me a counsellor who I didn't get on very well with. As a result, I studied. And then trained in suicide trauma assessments, and obviously with bereavement. And my volunteer side of things is I've been working for Crew's Bereavement Care for 13 years as a national supervisor, bereavement trainer, and I work for major instances as well. My hat with Task is very much around taking those initial calls when the calls come through to us about mental health. It's deciding on what is best for the person. In other words, if they're in trauma, whether it's suicide, those type of calls come through to me, and an appointment is actually booked with myself. I then do a bit of a triage, do an assessment of them, and then we then signpost them to the most appropriate counselling service. For myself, I may take on clients for PTSD. I'm trained to work with the military as well as the blue light, as well as suicide. And I hate to say this, but literally between the time of, I suppose, April to June, we've had 39 calls from ambulance staff who have either attempted to take their lives or actually in the middle of taking their lives. So as you can see, our calls that come through for mental health are quite wide, from not just bereavement, stress, and a lot of other things as well. So that's a little bit about me and what I do.
Brilliant, thank you very much, David. So there are a couple of people, or a few people on this call who will have had long COVID or been shielding during this time, and we haven't really touched on that, I think. Yeah, and it'd be really great to talk a little bit about that. I know you've worked with a few people who've had long COVID or who've been shielding. So what has been the impact for these people, and what do you think in your experience has helped people in this position?
I think there's two sides. There's the people that have actually had long COVID, and then there's the people who have seen their friends, colleagues go down with long COVID, the effect it has on them. The people who have suffered from long COVID have had a kind of a dual loss. They've lost maybe their job, maybe their life that they used to have. So there is a lot of mental strain, physical differences for them that they find difficult to cope with. And then there's that part where they can't talk to anybody because there's no one available for them to go and see them or actually be with. And therefore their families themselves are the people who are also suffering because they can't see them. So the people that I've been working with have luckily come home in some cases, but some cases we can't support with counselling because they are unable to talk or breathe for long enough to have a conversation. So we've supported people with different pieces of apparatus, beds, etc., to help them. The biggest thing for them is letting their colleagues down, not being there to support the team around them when they want to get back, even those that have been recognised as having the symptoms, but then have to isolate. Very similar to what Craig was saying, some of them have moved from many different places, and as a result of that, they're on their own. They don't have people around with them. They don't have support. So that isolation has given them stress. There are financial implications. So again, a lot of the people that have been coming through on that sense have been feeling isolated. Certainly they feel that they want still to be there on the front line. They feel that they're burdening their colleagues with the fact that they are ill. There's the other side of it as well, as some of the paramedics were saying to me that they have had to make the choice, which has been the difficult part, of whether or not they should take a patient into hospital or not, whether it's better for them to die at home or whether actually it's better for them to be taken in, knowing full well that their families may not see them again. So again, the stress is on them to take that decision. And sometimes they haven't had the support to make that decision. So again, that stress, that feeling that actually, you know, that they have to make that call, and they feel and they're worried that if they make the wrong call, where they're going to be suspended, what's going to happen to them. And there are other people who have had, who've been isolated, who have actually seen their colleagues going into hospital and not being able to deal with it, in the sense that they've been stressed, not having information. But the other part, of course, is that when a person dies of long COVID in the service, it's the ripple effects of the station, it's the ripple effect to the people around that then causes the stress, but also the grieving. And the second part, of course, is that that kind of grieving process is sometimes not referred to. Some people don't know that other people are connected to them. So it's a kind of a get straight on with the job. You just carry on. It's just another thing. You know, somebody's died, okay, but we have a service to run. So these are some of the feelings, emotions that people are coming through with. Finance is a big thing. Finance is a big thing about going down to half pay, what's going to happen to them, losing their job, losing their houses. So again, all those additional stresses that they're coming through. And I'm pleased to say that at least TASC has been able to support people financially, but also giving them financial help, you know, advising them how they can get support, what they can do. And that's been, from what I can see, a great help for a lot of people.
Thank you. And I think what I'm hearing there a lot, David, is that, and I know Craig's put in the chat, it's acknowledging that there's been a really heavy burden psychologically on everyone in the service at this time, and it's left people feeling quite isolated, and that's why we've set up the groups. We want to be here as Doctors in Distress and the College of Paramedics to support you and to give you that space as well to speak with other people who've been through the same experience. They can understand you so much better than anyone else because they've been through the same thing. And I think, as Craig and David have pointed out, and I'm sure our facilitators will touch on in a bit, having that group support really helps reduce those feelings of isolation. And I think that's been one of the key takeaways from the groups that we've run before. Craig, you have your hand up. I don't know if there's something you wanted to add.
It was just, Susanna, on the back of what David's just mentioned around, you know, that comment around, you know, taking patients into ambulances and knowing that the likelihood is that that individual wasn't going to be returning home, and how you manage that emotion from both the patient, yourself, and also the family members. But secondly, I think we probably just need to be conscious around how we support our colleagues moving forward around that psychological trauma. We're probably going to start seeing an increase in coronial inquests now as a result of COVID-19, and sadly also investigations as well around long delays for these poor patients. And that's going to have its impact upon our staff members, because our staff members are potentially going to be asked to write statements as part of those inquests. So I don't know whether there's already work going on, Joe and Liz, from the college perspective, but for me, it's something that we probably just need to be conscious of how we support the team, because that's likely to come our way, and it's important that that doesn't increase the psychological distress really to our staff.
And that unfortunate, Craig, has already started.
And that's something that, you know, I said before, there are no set topics of discussion in our groups. So come to our groups with anything, you know, just to talk. Whilst we may not be able to provide the solutions, I think talking about these things is just a really powerful thing. David, I've just got one last question for you before we move on to our facilitators. So I'm a paramedic and I'm on the fence about coming to our groups. I don't really know what our groups would be like. Is there any benefit to going to a group? What would you say?
I would say there's a huge amount of benefits coming to a group. I think sharing your experience, listening to other people, knowing that you're not on your own is something else, is the fact that you can share those moments that other people have gone through maybe as well. It's also the fact that maybe people are coping in a different way, that you'll learn from them, the fact that there are things that they do, or maybe that you haven't heard before. But it's also that, I suppose it's that comrade part where, you know, you're going through something that other people have, but also the fact that actually, you know, you may see people who are worse than yourself. You may see people who aren't as bad as yourself, but what you are actually seeing is what you're going through is not unusual and it's not abnormal. And I think that's one of the things about this is that people sometimes say to me, look, you know, I'm feeling like this, and should I be feeling like this? Well, actually in that group setting, that's something that people will see and hear from others to understand that actually, yeah, even though I don't want to talk about it, I can hear from other people what's actually happening, and actually, yes, I'm okay, I'm all right. So yes, I would highly recommend to go into the groups.
Thank you, David. And I think you're so right, just seeing that there are other people in a similar situation to you and realizing you feel the way you feel. There's no should, there's no anything, that's just how you feel, and having that support there and other people is really valuable. Thank you so much, David. We are now going to move on to our facilitators who've been waiting very patiently to speak. So that's Barbara, Steve, Catherine and Mary. Welcome to you all. So these are the 4 wonderful people that are going to be leading your groups. So long COVID and shielding groups will be Steve and Barbara, and the frontline groups will be Mary and Catherine. So Steve, if we can just start with you, and we'll just go around and introduce. So we'll start with Steve and then we'll go on. But Steve, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I've been listening very intently to our speakers today, and it resonates with the work I did in the fire service. These are very similar issues. Craig, you talked about the support of people working in teams, and then we've also addressed people who are not in teams right now, not working right now. So how do they get support? So a bit about me. Qualified as a drama therapist and then a psychotherapist in '98, and then to teach and supervise other psychotherapists. My specialism was in work-based counselling, so I set up a service for Nottinghamshire County Council, all 8 departments, and then moved to the fire service down in Dorset to specialise and set up a welfare function for them, and specialised in trauma. Much of the work in the fire service was day-to-day relationships, struggles with the work, and so on and so on. I was interested to know whether the ambulance service now has a formal welfare service within it. I know there's the, David's charity work support. My father was an ambulance driver. They were called drivers in those days. They weren't paramedics. This was going back some years. He did 25 years in the ambulance service in Kent. But I know the job has changed dramatically since then.
Thank you, Steve. Barbara, quick few lines to introduce yourself, and then we'll move on to Mary.
Sure, yes, okay, so I'm Barbara. I'm a qualified psychotherapist and group therapist as well. Worked mainly in the NHS, but also in other forums as well. Yes, I mean, obviously that suggests that I believe in groups and the power of groups, as people have been speaking about today. But I guess I just also want to say something about how difficult I think groups can be in terms of, stepping into that space. And, much as you've heard today about how positive that can be. And obviously that's, really hoping that people will feel able to take up the invitation to join a group here. But I guess I just did want to say something about recognising that can be a difficult thing to do. It can create a lot of anxiety about what it'll be like to be with other people, and to, how much you'll have to speak or not speak, or what will be expected of you in that group. So I think it's important to recognise that. And I've done one Doctors in Distress group for nurses with long COVID, and I guess the other thing that's particular to that group, and will be with this group, is the long COVID, the effect of long COVID, and just how difficult that can make it to attend. you know, sort of regularly, which, you know, I think it's really important to acknowledge that, and for that to be something that will be thought about in the group, and not, hopefully not for people to be discouraged to put themselves forward for this.
Yeah, no, thank you, Barbara. I think that's really important to say, and we do acknowledge that it can be very difficult and daunting to join, and we understand that, and but you are so welcome, and we would love to have you there, but it's not, we do understand that it's not perhaps the easiest thing to join. Mary, over to you.
Yeah, perhaps it's a good moment for me just to say that I think I just made a few notes as people were talking earlier, and I think that to put it really simply, I think coming into a group will reduce the fear of what you're feeling, and what you're feeling, you're just left alone with it, and it feels very frightening. I mean, as has been said, the word tsunami was mentioned, and I think that to make a link with a stranger across a virtual room who says, I've had that, makes just such a difference. So yeah, like other people, I'm a psychotherapist, and I seem to have wandered into the support group role, and I have to say how much I enjoy it hugely. There is a kind of deeper significance here, as Steve said about his father. My mother was a nurse, so I'm sure I'm driven in some ways by some kind of motivation there. So I'm doing support groups for doctors in distress. I'm also doing support groups for counselling training organisations for the trainees who have issues that arise when they're on counselling trainings. And I'm one of the support group facilitators in that role as well, and absolutely love it. And I think, just to say finally, that I kind of found through doing this work that I couldn't do it 5 days a week. I needed to do something called leisure, and then I decided it wasn't leisure, it was called pleasure. And so and that for me is coffee with friends, swimming, and browsing, and just off time. And you know, I think it's just important for me. I can't obviously model that, but I know that there is something about a balance. Life is so full on, so much coming in at you the whole time. I'm very fond of time. So yeah, that's me. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. And it's really important to say, you know, we can't all just give all the time, we have to take for ourselves as well, and I think that's really important. And last but not least, Catherine, if you can just introduce yourself as well. And I know you're a group analyst, so I know you're also quite a fan of groups, so if you could kind of just talk a little bit about what you feel the positives are of groups, and why, you know, if people are a bit unsure why a group would be helpful. I know others have touched on it, but it'd be great to hear your perspective too.
Okay. Hello everyone, I'm Catherine. I suppose the bringing people together in the midst of what's been a pandemic that's impacted on everyone, and how to process, I think, some of the really frightening things that have happened. And listening to Craig, what I thought, I just made one little note where the walking and the talking and the processing that happens. I think a group is a bit like a psychological walk, where we can accompany each other, reduce the anxiety, reduce the fear, for people to connect with each other, to be able to hear back very similar thoughts and feelings that they've got themselves. I work in groups right across the board. I worked particularly in trauma, childhood trauma, right the way through. And I'm kind of thinking of the links between the chronic nature of trauma and the chronic nature of COVID. And I think where there may be some overlaps with that as well. So obviously, I think groups are great. I think they can feel a bit anxiety provoking to start with, but I always say that you get out as much as you put in. So you're willing to show your face, you're willing to hear your voice, then I think that can be very rewarding in itself. Make your mark, put yourself in the middle and be open to what the benefits are. But certainly I've done groups from children to adolescents to women leaving custody and very trauma-based work as well. So I'm really looking forward to running my first one of this sort of group with Doctors in Distress. I'm excited.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Catherine. Steve, I just wanted to pop back to you quickly, and all facilitators, please do feel free to jump in. But I think confidentiality is a really extremely important aspect. Our groups are completely confidential, but Steve, if you could just kind of touch on that, and also a question we've had before, and I think it's important. Does everyone have to speak if you turn up? Is it, is it compulsory to share? How do the groups work on a kind of weekly basis?
Well, just as a group would be run outside of Zoom, we use headphones where the area is not private, and we make sure we're not interrupted. Whatever is raised in the group or talked about stays within that group, and we would ask that people do not share that with family or friends. Also, I think it's important because we are working with people who work in organizations that that no entries are made into your personnel record. We don't have contact with HR. We don't even know which trusts you're working for. So there is no danger of feedback to your employers. Does that cover it, Susanna?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Sorry, my internet connection is cutting in and out, which isn't very helpful. So no, that was brilliant. Thank you, Steve. Mary and Barbara, you've run a couple of groups for us before. I was just wondering if you could both share what to expect. I think it can be, as we said before, just a bit of an unknown. So if both of you could share a little bit about what to expect, that would be brilliant.
I mean, I think one thing about, having your camera on and when to speak and whether you might want to speak, these things really do evolve with the over the course of the group, and certainly I feel my task is to facilitate that, particularly for people who maybe aren't sure about being in a group and what whether to speak or not to speak, or whether to have their camera on or not. That does feel like that's part of my role, is to provide to make sure the space feels as safe as possible, really, for people to use it as they need to use it. And that, as I say, that does evolve over time as people get used to each other, and you're no longer talking to strangers, you're talking to people who are in your group, who you start to bond with, I think, really quite quickly, as people share their experiences and realize that people are no longer as isolated on their own with their difficulties as they have been.
Yep, I agree with that, Barbara, very much. I just reflecting on the previous group I did, is that I personally obviously be sensitive if people have got their cameras off, but I would ask if they would like to put their camera on, or I might make the judgment to say it's fine if you have your camera off now, but I wonder if you might want to put it on for the last 10 minutes or something, simply because looking back over the course, we had a few, if you like, brief visitors who kind of came for one session, didn't come again. They tended to be the people with camera off, and I think that they sort of missed out on letting other people reach towards them and conversations would go on without anyone expecting a reply from them or anything like that. And I would say there's quite a difference between camera on and not talking. I think that's absolutely fine, but I would, if possible, I think to be seen is, you know, if you could, I think it is so worth it, even though it's a huge struggle, if you can. And if you can't, then for a few, you know, 10 minutes at the end, and have another go the following week as well, and another 10 minutes at the end. Yeah, but I think it is quite an important thing in terms of the relationships within the group, and the kind of very natural concern that we start to develop for each other.
Thank you, Mary. I just want to touch on something as well, which I think may be relevant for everyone. I know that shifts can change, can't they? So it may be that people are feeling like they can't come every week, or with long COVID, they're a bit concerned about coming every week. Barbara or Mary, do people have to come every week? Is it compulsory? Will you miss out if you don't? The answer is no, but I'm sure you can expand a bit further on that.
Yes, I mean, it's not compulsory. It's definitely encouraged, because I think people, once they sort of join the group, generally do want to be there. They start to feel that they're missing something if they're not going to be there each week. And certainly the group misses people who aren't there. You know, I think groups form a sort of life of their own, really, quite you know, remarkably quickly. But yes, of course, people recognize, you know, that's the good thing about having a group for people who have, you know, something in common, like their work or like symptoms of long COVID. People are obviously very understanding of the constraints. And I just wanted to say that the people who did attend, I mean, Susanna knows this because she got all the feedback, but people did really get a lot from it, even if they were a little bit sort of cautious at the beginning. People really were very enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, I just would add to that, Barbara, that just a suggestion for people to pick up or not would be to put something in your diary from the 23rd of September. 5 o'clock is your group time, for count it through for 8 weeks on the calendar. And I personally would mark it in. It doesn't mean you need to come. I would like it if you do, but it's worth just putting that into your diary, 5 to 6:15.
Yeah, brilliant, and thank you. And that's for the frontline group. So if you're frontline, it's 5 to 6:15 on a Thursday from the 23rd, and if you're long COVID and shielding, it's from the 21st on a Tuesday, 11 to 12:15, and that's a really helpful suggestion. Catherine, just to wrap up, to finish the webinar, what, as a facilitator, do you hope that people will get out of the groups?
I hope that the group members will feel that they have a connection, that they've been able to feel understood, that they've been able to share with each other and hear back from each other as well. Things that are valuable, but also that help them to manage and cope with whatever anxieties they're bringing into the group.
Great, thank you. Joe, Steve, go on.
Just on the subject of feelings, I think some people sometimes are worried that they're feeling too much and they don't want to bring this to a group or for that to be seen. The mantra we tend to use is, whatever you're feeling are normal reactions to abnormal situations. Normal reactions to abnormal situations.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And I think, given everything that everyone on the call has been through these past 18 months, I think that's a really brilliant way to end our webinar. Craig or Joe, I don't know if you have anything that you just want to pop in before we finish.
Just for me, Susanna, if there's anyone in the Northwest region who's on this webinar and wants to join some of the walks, they can follow me on Twitter. Joe's got my handle, ScouseMedic30. I'm not allowed to share it across the organisation because it's a private Facebook group. So you can get in touch with me through Twitter and I can send you the details for our walks.
Brilliant, thank you.
Well,
Jo, anything from you?
No, other than thank you very much to everyone that's given their time to present today, and everyone that's attended as well. I hope it's been really useful. It's certainly been incredibly insightful for me. So I hope that it sort of encourages people to join the groups and to participate and share, and hopefully this will be really supportive for you.
Brilliant. And so thank you, everyone. We will be in contact via email, and I really, really hope that we will see you all in 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.
Thank you.